recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. All participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, you may press star 1 on your phone to ask a question. I would now like to turn the conference over to Laura Morrell. Thank you, and you may begin.
Thank you, Tasha. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Morrell, and I work in the One Health Office of the National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. On behalf of the One Health Office, I'm pleased to welcome you to the monthly Zoonoses and One Health Updates call on November 6, 2019. ZOHU call content is directed to epidemiologists, laboratorians, scientists, physicians, nurses, veterinarians, animal health officials, and other public health professionals at the federal, state, and local levels. Please be aware that CDC has no control over who participates on this conference call. Therefore, please exercise discretion on sensitive content and material, as confidentiality during these calls cannot be guaranteed. Today's call is being recorded, so if you have any objections, you may disconnect. Detailed instructions for obtaining free continuing education are available on our website and will be given at the end of this call. These presentations will not include any discussion of the unlabeled use of a product or a product under investigational use. The Planning Committee reviewed content to ensure there is no bias. CDC did not accept commercial support for this activity. CDC, our planners, presenters, and their spouses or partners disclose they have no financial interests or other relationships with the manufacturers of commercial products, suppliers of commercial services, or commercial supporters. Before we begin today's presentation, Dr. Casey Barton-Baravesh, Director of CDC's One Health Office, will share some news and updates.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for today's ZOHU call and welcome to all of our new participants. The ZOHU call audience continues to grow with subscribers representing professionals from government, non-governmental organizations, industry, and academia, including students. We appreciate your help to continue spreading the word about the ZOHU call. Please continue to share the ZOHU call website link with your colleagues from human, animal, environment, and other relevant One Health sectors. The site includes links to past call recordings, information on free continuing education for a variety of professionals, and a link to subscribe to the ZOHU call email list. To begin today's call, I'd like to share a few highlights from the One Health news from CDC, which were included with today's ZOHU call newsletter. First, CDC has launched Life is Better with Clean Hands, a new national hand washing campaign, and CDC's Climate and Health program is celebrating 10 years. There's some recent and upcoming observances and events. I hope everyone enjoyed One Health Day on November 3rd. It was great to see all the promotions and the information being shared on social media. We have Antibiotic Awareness Week, November 18th to 24th, and all three of today's presentations are about antibiotics. The World One Health Congress will be in Edinburgh, Scotland, June 14th through 18th. The call for abstracts is now open, and applications for the One Health Fellowship Fund to attend the conference are due on January 15th. We've shared links to recent publications on several topics, including incubation periods of enteric illnesses and foodborne outbreaks in the U.S. and fatal Lyme carditis in New England. Regarding outbreaks, there are 2 new outbreaks of Salmonella infections that have been posted, and final updates have been posted for 3 outbreaks of Salmonella infections linked to contact with pig ear dog treats, backyard poultry, and pet hedgehogs. A list of selected and ongoing and past U.S. outbreaks of zoonoses, as well as information on staying safe and healthy around animals, is always available on CDC's Healthy Pets, Healthy People website. The complete CDC current outbreak list, including foodborne outbreaks and others, is available at cdc.gov/outbreaks. As always, if you would like for us to share news from your organization, or if you want to suggest presentation topics or volunteer to present on a future ZOHU call, please contact us at zohucall@cdc.gov. Again, thanks for supporting the ZOHU call and for joining us today. I'll now turn the call back over to Laura.
Thank you. Today's presentations will address one or more of the following objectives. Describe 2 key points from each presentation. Describe how a multi-sectoral One Health approach can be applied to the presentation topics. Identify an implication for animal and human health. Identify a One Health approach strategy for prevention, detection, or response to public health threats. And identify 2 new resources from CDC partners. Questions for all presenters will be taken at the end of the call. Call 1-800-593-8936 and enter participant passcode 9611836. Press star 1 and give the operator your name and affiliation. Please name the presenter or topic at the beginning of each question. You'll find resources and links for all presentations on our website and in today's ZOHU call email. Our first presentation, One Health and Antimicrobial Resistance, a United States Perspective, will be given by Dr. Susan Brightpoint. Please begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Susan Brightpoint, and I'm a veterinarian at FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine, or CVM. And I currently work within CVM's Office of Surveillance and Compliance on a variety of issues related to antimicrobial use and antimicrobial stewardship in veterinary settings. I do want to take the opportunity to thank the ZOHU planners for inviting me to present on this topic. And basically, this presentation is a brief summary of a collaborative article which was authored by representatives of several different U.S. government agencies. So we had FDA, CVM represented, as well as the USDA, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, the USDA Agricultural Research Service, or ARS, the CDC, and also the Minnesota Department of Health all participated in putting this article together. This article was published earlier this year, and it was part of a special One Health issue of the World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE, their scientific and technical review. And the issue was entitled Successes and Remaining Challenges Within the One Health Approach. So this article is really an excellent opportunity for our agencies to really successfully collaborate and share information about our efforts in the area of antimicrobial use and resistance across the One Health spectrum. And the title of the article, as you can see, is One Health and Antimicrobial Resistance, a United States Perspective. So on today's talk, I'll basically just give a very brief background on antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, why it's a One Health issue. I'd like to give an example of a One Health collaborative approach, which is the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, or NARMS, and give some additional examples also of efforts in the human healthcare, animal healthcare, and environmental sectors in addressing the problem of AMR. And also, we'll just point out at the end a few data gaps and potential research needs as well. So for a little background, antimicrobials are basically just drugs that kill or inhibit the growth of microorganisms, which could be bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, or protozoa. But for the article and for this presentation, we focus on antimicrobial resistance, specifically in bacteria. And bacteria can be resistant to an antimicrobial when they can survive and reproduce even in its presence. So there are textbooks written on this subject, so I'm very briefly just going to touch on a couple of other basic things in terms of types of AMR. Essentially, there are two main types, naturally occurring and acquired. So naturally occurring is also sometimes called intrinsic resistance, which means, because of the mode of action of a particular antimicrobial drug, it may just simply not be effective against a certain bacteria. Whereas acquired resistance means that a bacteria was initially sensitive to an antimicrobial, but then they acquired the ability to resist the effects of that antimicrobial through various mechanisms. And some examples of potential mechanisms could just be that there could have been spontaneous mutations that result in prevention of an antimicrobial drug from being able to bind to its usual target on a bacterial cell, or there could be other mechanisms like acquisition of enzymes that inactivate the antimicrobial, or even efflux pumps that actually will pump out the antimicrobial from the bacterial cell. So those are just a few examples of some mechanisms through which bacteria could potentially acquire resistance to antimicrobials. And then we talk about the drivers of AMR, and I've listed two of the main ones here, antimicrobial selection pressure and then transmission. So antimicrobials can cause a selective pressure by essentially killing the susceptible bacteria, which then allows or selects for antimicrobial resistant bacteria to allow them to be able to survive and multiply. Now, sometimes co-selection is also a factor where resistance to multiple classes of antimicrobials occurs, and that could be because of shared resistance mechanisms in the case of cross-resistance, or there could be genetic linkages among resistance genes in the case of co-resistance. So in those ways, there can be resistance to multiple classes of drugs. And then in terms of transmission, which is another main driver of AMR, what I'm referring to here is just the spread of resistant bacteria, which could be transmitted between patients and healthcare workers, or between people and animals, or between environments, so that antimicrobial exposure in a single instance actually could pose risks, locally as well as ultimately to the global community through travel and stuff like that. So resistant organisms may spread though via direct or indirect contact, or through environmental surfaces or waterways, and also could be transmitted through the food chain. So the impacts of AMR are pretty substantial. In the U.S., an estimated 23,000 people die each year due to antimicrobial drug-resistant infections. And that could also add as much as $20 billion in direct health care costs annually, and $35 billion in lost productivity costs annually. And resistant infections often lead to, treatment with last resort antimicrobials, and could also result in longer periods of hospitalization because they're more complicated, obviously. Resistant infections also affect animal health with the loss of effective disease treatment options and potentially increases in morbidity and mortality. So before I discuss how AMR is a One Health issue, I just wanted to remind everyone of the definition of One Health, which is the collaborative effort of multiple disciplines and sectors working locally, nationally, and globally with the goal of achieving optimal health outcomes, recognizing the interconnection between people, animals, plants, and our shared environment. So any use of antimicrobials, whether it's in humans, animals, crops, or other areas in the environment, have the potential to contribute to antimicrobial resistance issues. Antimicrobials are used in human health care, such as acute care hospitals, long-term care facilities, outpatient facilities. Also in animal or veterinary medicine, antimicrobials are used in, the similar types of settings, as well as in all types of species. So your companion animals, food-producing animals, aquaculture. And antimicrobials are also used in crop and fruit tree production sometimes. But in all of these sectors, antimicrobials could be needed for use in the treatment of, or prevention or control of bacterial diseases. So all of these sectors also have a role in the transmission and spread of antimicrobial resistance. And, resistant bacteria can actually be transmitted between species, like I said, and between ecosystems as well. And that basically demonstrates that AMR needs a One Health approach in terms of addressing it. This figure is from the article, the published article, and basically demonstrates some of the interconnectedness of the different ecosystems. and potential routes of transmission of antimicrobial-resistant bacteria between the systems. For example, just one example would be the manufacture of antimicrobials in an industrial system could result in the discharge of antimicrobials into water systems, ultimately spreading, potentially exposing animals, humans, and other parts of the environment through these potentially multiple pathways. So with all of this interconnectedness, it's clear, again, that confronting AMR does require this type of multidisciplinary approach at local, national, and global levels. And it does kind of require us to acknowledge the shared responsibilities across the sectors. It requires ongoing and enhanced surveillance and monitoring of antimicrobial use and resistance across all sectors. It also is important to implement good antimicrobial stewardship practices in all settings and to promote the development of alternatives to antimicrobials, which could include infection control practices that would ultimately, hopefully, help reduce the incidence of infections and thus reduce the use of antimicrobials, except when they're needed, obviously, for therapeutic purposes. So while antimicrobials will always be needed as a tool to fight bacterial diseases, there are ways that we can work on trying to optimize their use and, ultimately preserve their effectiveness. In 2015, the U.S. government released the National Action Plan for Combating Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria, or CARB. There were 5 main goals to the plan, and actually, just to let you know, there is work on updating the plan for the next 5 years, but one of the main 5 goals in the current plan is, as I've bolded here, is to strengthen national One Health surveillance efforts to combat resistance. So this is kind of one of the collaborations. This article is one collaboration, just to kind of summarize some of the activities, but there are many collaborations going on across multiple sectors addressing this issue. And one that I did want to go into a little bit of detail about is the NARMS program. NARMS is the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, and this was a program, a partnership established in 1996, and it started out as a partnership between FDA, CDC, and USDA, and these are still the 3 partners involved. And basically, also within the program, though, are about 54, I believe, state, territorial, and local public health departments all working together in this partnership. So this program, it's a surveillance program which tracks antimicrobial susceptibility among intestinal bacteria isolated from ill humans, retail meats, and animals at slaughter. And I've listed here the current objectives of NARMS, basically, again, to monitor the trends in AMR among specific foodborne bacteria, which I'll talk about here in a minute, to disseminate timely information, to conduct research, and also one of their objectives is to assist the FDA in making decisions related to the approval of antimicrobial drugs for animals. So this is a slide which basically just shows a summary of what we call arm of NARMS monitors. So on the left, the USDA, basically the Food Safety and Inspection Service, monitors food animal samples, so it's chickens, turkeys, cattle, and swine through a fecal sampling program. And sampling takes place near the time of slaughter. And then in the middle panel, we show that FDA basically monitors retail meats, which are sampled from grocery stores. So, the pork chops, ground beef, ground turkey, and chicken parts. And then also we've started to pilot some new sample types in seafood and veal. And then the CDC over on the right, they are responsible for monitoring samples from humans that have become ill. So the bacteria that are monitored are primarily 4 of the major foodborne bacteria: Salmonella, Campylobacter, E. coli, and Enterococcus. Now, CDC also conducts surveillance of resistance among Vibrio species other than Vibrio cholera, and also Shigella and typhoidal Salmonella from humans. And with regard to E. coli, CDC monitors, in particular, the 0157 strain, whereas USDA, FSIS, and FDA monitor resistance among generic, which means they're non-serotyped, E. coli from food animals and retail meats. And the generic E. coli are used by USDA and FDA basically as indicator organisms to detect, emerging resistance patterns and even specific resistance genes that could potentially be transferred to other pathogenic gram-negative bacteria like Salmonella. But in addition to monitoring antimicrobial susceptibility patterns, NARMS also partners, their partners collaborate on many epidemiologic investigations and microbiologic research studies, and they also do perform whole genome sequencing as part of routine processes in the analysis of Salmonella and Campylobacter, in addition to some sequencing of resistant strains of E. coli and Enterococcus. So this is just a very brief summary of a lot of very interesting stuff that NARMS does, but for information about how each of the 3 arms of NARMS kind of conducts their sampling, what antimicrobials are tested, what analytics are performed, the reports that are produced. I have included some of the links at the bottom of this slide where you can visit each of their sites and get more information. And typically NARMS does also produce an integrated report where all 3 arms are presented together, and they will host kind of an interactive web-based tool for data exploration too, called NARMS Now. Some other examples of efforts to address antimicrobial resistance in the human healthcare side of things, I just wanted to very briefly touch on a few things with regard to many of the activities that they have going on. So antimicrobial use surveillance, antimicrobial resistance surveillance, antimicrobial stewardship. So in terms of use surveillance, there's 3 main goals for antimicrobial use surveillance, and basically they can quantify and describe the prescribing of antimicrobials, help assess the appropriateness of prescribing, and also help to measure the impact of interventions that were intended to improve prescribing. And CDC in particular has conducted several facility-based point prevalence surveys and have also used survey, pharmacy, and medical claims data to really try to describe U.S. antimicrobial prescribing across the human healthcare spectrum. And also antimicrobial use and resistance modules for hospitals have been incorporated in the National Healthcare Safety Network. Several antimicrobial resistance surveillance programs also track AMR among pathogenic bacteria isolated from humans. I've only listed 2 here, the active bacterial core surveillance and the emerging infections program, and then in addition to the NARMS program, which I had mentioned a few minutes ago. CDC has also done a lot of work in the area of antimicrobial stewardship for humans and has published core elements, which are essentially standards for antimicrobial stewardship program implementation in multiple settings like hospitals, long-term care, and outpatient settings. And an example of a state-run program is actually the Minnesota One Health Antibiotic Stewardship Collaborative. And this program really promotes judicious antimicrobial use and stewardship across all sectors to really try to reduce the impact of resistant pathogens in humans, animals, and environment. There are obviously many other efforts underway in other states as well, but I just wanted to mention this one. Animal agriculture and animal health obviously also has been involved in many activities related to addressing AMR. I did want to just touch on a few kind of relevant guidance documents that FDA has published. For example, the FDA guidance for industry number 152. Basically, this guidance for industry outlines kind of a qualitative risk assessment process that FDA uses to assess antimicrobial drugs that are intended for use in food-producing animals, looking at the risk in terms of development of resistance and taking into consideration the potential for human exposure to the antimicrobial resistant bacteria through ingestion of animal-derived food. FDA also did publish guidance for industry number 209 and number 213. GFI number 209 basically outlined in some detail the principles for judicious antimicrobial use in food-producing animals, and GFI number 213, the implementation of which was completed as of January 1st, 2017, essentially limited the use of medically important antimicrobials in food-producing animals to therapeutic purposes and to those involving veterinary oversight. And in terms of medically important, we are referring to antimicrobials that are medically important to human treatments. And just to mention, Appendix A in that first guidance I mentioned does list out what the current medically important antimicrobials are and what their ranking is. So that's where that information comes from. There are certainly ongoing efforts also to collect antimicrobial use in animals, such as the USDA APHIS administered antimicrobial use surveys through their NOMS program. And these were conducted in feedlot cattle and swine operations in 2017 for data from 2016. And we also have some FDA cooperative agreements underway, which were awarded in 2016 to researchers who are essentially piloting methodologies to collect on-farm antimicrobial use data from cattle, swine, and poultry. And then, obviously, I talked about NARMS already in relation to the antimicrobial resistance surveillance. Just to touch on a few other programs, I'll just briefly mention the FDA Veterinary Laboratory Investigation and Response Network, or VetLearn, as well as the USDA National Animal Health Laboratory Network, or NALN, which are both conducting pilot studies to conduct antimicrobial susceptibility testing for certain animal pathogens from companion animal and food-producing animal species. And in one of the projects conducting whole genome sequencing on a subset of those isolates. So just showing some additional efforts in terms of trying to get some information about animal pathogens. And then in the environment, there are basically efforts going on as well. The U.S. Geological Survey and U.S. EPA conduct ongoing water surveys, basically trying to get at some routine sampling of streams, rivers, beaches, and groundwater systems to evaluate ecological health. The USDA Agricultural Research Service, or ARS, conducts extensive research to study the transport and fate of resistant bacteria in soil and other pre-harvest animal production settings. And a lot of the efforts in the environmental sector are certainly focused on reducing and controlling waste through stewardship and waste management programs. Just listed here some of the data gaps and research needs. I know I've already used more time than I was allotted, so we can certainly circle back around with any questions at the end. But it's fairly self-explanatory here from this slide that we still need a lot of information. And in conclusion, just wanted to, reiterate that AMR is a multifaceted and complex problem that needs a One Health approach. There are multiple efforts already ongoing across the United States, and just also wanted to reiterate that because antimicrobials are a shared resource, antimicrobial stewardship is also a shared responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presentation, CDC's Antimicrobial Resistance Year in Review, Progress Across One Health, is by Dr. Dawn Sievert. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So again, I'm Dawn Sievert. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk with all of you today. I'm an epidemiologist. In my current role, I am Senior Science Advisor for Antimicrobial Resistance, the coordination and strategy across the CDC. So at a high level, in my brief presentation, I'm going to just walk you through some of the main areas and the work that we've done at CDC to combat antibiotic resistance over this past year. And as Susan made clear, next slide please, why are we here? Because antibiotic resistance is very clearly a One Health issue. Anytime antibiotics are used, they can lead to resistance, even if it is very appropriate and needed and necessary. And we know, therefore, that this crosses all sectors because antibiotics are used in people, animals, and on crops. Next slide, please. So at the CDC, we work to fight antibiotic resistance, again, across all sectors. And how do we do that? So across healthcare, we work to improve antibiotic use and infection prevention with innovation and proven practices to try to control spread. When we work with foodborne illness, we try to rapidly identify drug-resistant foodborne bacteria to stop and solve outbreaks and help improve prevention. In the community space, we work to detect, prevent, track, and treat drug-resistant pathogens. Internationally, our collaborations and capacities are trying to improve surveillance, infection control, prevention, stewardship, and public health research. And as was mentioned by Susan, we are also at the CDC working to explore the unanswered questions about antimicrobial resistance and the interaction between human animals and the environment, and to try to identify and figure out what that impact, that true impact is with the environment. Specifically right now, we are focusing on surface water and soil. Next slide, please. So just this past September, we had an event celebration in New York City to celebrate the end of a year of collections of commitments called the Antimicrobial Resistance Challenge. And this was an initiative with CDC and other partners to bolster global efforts across sectors and around the world to set up, partner, and play their part in the fight against antibiotic resistance. And what was asked of the group was, how can you commit from your space and the area and the work that you do to try to combat antibiotic resistance? What can you do? And with those groups who made commitments, they were asked to focus on one or more of the following 5 areas. So either the space of sharing data and improving data collection, reducing the spread of resistant germs, the improvement of appropriate antibiotic use, including access, decreasing antibiotics and resistance in the environment, or investing in the development and improved access to vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. Next slide, please. This is very exciting, and this is what the numbers look like. Sorry, this is what the numbers look like that we achieved over this past year of collecting these commitments. So from September 2018 through September 2019. And can I ask, can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now my phone made a very scary sound and I was worried. Thank you. So in 1 year, Commitments from all 50 U.S. states and Washington, D.C. were collected, including all state health departments. More than 75 commitments were made from 33 countries and across 6 continents, and this will reach nearly 3 billion people around the world as these actions and commitments are carried out. 26 organizations representing over 10,000 healthcare facilities globally pledged to improve infection control or antibiotic use. More than 47 major food and agriculture-related corporations and organizations committed to reducing and preventing the spread of AR in animals and food production. 47 organizations made commitments related to improving safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene, and over 60 pharmaceutical and biotech groups committed to the development or providing access to products that will prevent and treat resistant infections. So very successful commitment collection. And a great celebration to identify and acknowledge all of the groups that took the time to make the commitments across the One Health sector. And we're very eager to watch the improvements and the actions that are continued to carry out now over the next 3 to 5 years, and to follow up with all of these groups to see the improvements that they're making and how they're combating antibiotic resistance. Next slide, please. The other area that we have been working very hard on, and work has been done over the last 5 years, has been with the National Action Plan to combat antibiotic resistance. And this has been an effort across federal agencies and all the federal agencies in the U.S. With a specific set of goals and objectives, and the agencies then all identified actions with measures that we would all be able to put forth and follow to track the work that we're doing to improve the work to combat and to try to decrease the spread and transmission and creation, development of antibiotic resistance. So those goals for these past 5 years have been focusing on slowing the emergence of resistant bacteria and preventing the spread, strengthening the One Health surveillance efforts, advancing development and use of rapid and innovative diagnostic tests, accelerating basic and applied research and development, and this would cover new antibiotics, therapeutics, and vaccines, and improving our international collaboration and capacities to move other countries along that may be a little bit behind or may need additional assistance with working on AR prevention, surveillance, control, and also research and development. Next slide, please. So we're now coming to the end of the first 5 years of all of this work. And so CDC, with all the other federal agencies, have been working now to review those 5 goals and the objectives under them, and to make any revisions that are necessary. And then for us to be able to work over these next 5 years on new measures and new actions. So hopefully, and what has been the case, is that many of the actions that we all put forth over the past 5 years have been achieved. There's still much work to do, but realistically, when actions were named, many of them were supposed to be completed. Things were supposed to be started and put in place to grow from. And we have achieved across federal agencies a lot of that work. So now we're looking at where the gaps exist and what do we need now to do to accomplish additional work and to close those gaps over the next 5 years. So the President's Advisory Council on Combating Antibiotic Resistance was one group that requested public feedback on this next iteration, and they put forth a report that we've been looking at and following as we look at these goals and objectives to revise them for the next 5 years. So at CDC, all of these that are listed here are a main focus for us on the work that we'll continue to do at CDC and how we'll work with our partners. So that includes things like continuing to advance the use of and the work that the National Healthcare Safety Network does. And NHSN collects data on antibiotic-resistant infections from healthcare-associated infections across many different types of healthcare settings. Also, the work that we're doing with acute care and other settings on antibiotic stewardship to advance and help human health. The work that the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System does at the CDC on human enteric illness tracking, and Susan gave a good explanation of NARM, so this, for our focus, is the human illness of those enterics on the CDC side. The other two cover the work that we do with state health departments and specific state sites through the ELC Cooperative Agreement and the Emerging Infections Program, and very specifically funding them for follow-up on outbreaks and investigations and tracking unique and emerging antibiotic resistance in their areas, and then sharing those data with us so that we'll have a better national and representative picture. So throughout this year, again, CDC has been helping and working with other federal agencies. Again, the CARB plan will end in 2020 from these past 5 years, so the transition will occur. The new plan will be finalized in early 2020, and we'll be looking all to begin that work by early 2021. So we're excited now for the next 5 years of work. And I know that all of you will be hearing more about that as that draws closer. The next thing I wanted to describe and explain to you is, in addition to all the work I named above and how we work with state health departments and specific funded sites, we also try very hard to open up the work that we do and advance the work that we do to help us move this work and effort forward against antimicrobial resistance with academia and professional organizations and other groups like that. And the way that we are able to get money out and to work with those groups to expand our research is through what we call the broad agency announcement funding. I'm sorry, and I didn't say next slide, but I'm on the BAA slide. And so what the BAAs are is announcements from CDC to identify gaps in knowledge or areas that we need more information, and we cannot do all of that work clearly at the CDC by ourselves. We need many partners and collaborations. And so we identify a list of work that gets announced usually around November and December, and then partners who are interested can look at specific topics and write proposals for how they would propose to address that gap or that issue or that need. And then through review process, by the end of that summer, through funds that we have, then we are able to identify the highest ranking scored proposals and then fund those for, usually they are 12 to 24 month projects. We've done this every year for the past 3 or 4 years. This year there will not be an announcement that goes out. We're in November now, so clearly there won't be an announcement that goes out November, December this year. We're going to be moving to every other year. So projects will continue 12 to 24 months and overlap each other, but we'll be putting this announcement out then next year. So next year at this time, we'll be excited to put forth another announcement to start gathering new proposals from interested participants. But so far, CDC has provided about $110 million in research and piloting to 96 public-private institutions, both domestically and globally. And this reflects 158 applied public health research projects, and again, all around antimicrobial resistance. CDC supports innovations and collaborations with investigators to identify and implement new ways to prevent antibiotic resistance infections and their spread. And again, as I mentioned, the awardees include educational institutions, nonprofit organizations, state and local government, and private industry for research and development. If you are interested, and we invite you to go to the website that's shown on the slide, and what it does is list all of the participants, the applicants who've been funded so far. So it will show the institution, it will show the topic that they're working on, and as we continue to update the website, it also will show publications that come out of the great work that's being done and the findings from all of that work that we funded. So please continue to take a look at that site for information on the type of work that's being done and accomplished through the BAAs. The next slide, please. So I'm very excited, and this is almost my last slide. So the last of these slides, we're very excited. This is things that are up and coming now, basically. So the CDC 2019 AR Threats Report that we are very excited about is actually expected out before the end of next week. So it's perfect timing to be able to announce this to you and let you know about it so that you can watch for it. There'll be a lot of information coming out once the press release is out and the embargo is released. And so by the end of next week, you'll hear information about the new CDC 2019 AR Threats Report. This is the second report that we are putting out to identify important antimicrobial resistant pathogens that seriously affect human health, and it crosses all of the pathogens that we follow across CDC, so again, across the One Health spectrum. CDC published the first report in 2013, and it was a comprehensive analysis that ranked 18 top AR threats in the U.S., and this was the first time really that the CDC clearly raised the nation's awareness about antibiotic resistance and the specific pathogens that we were dealing with at CDC. So the 19 report follows a similar format but updated. The preliminary data, I can tell you, do show that prevention is working, but more work is clearly needed, especially globally. So our work is not anywhere near being done, but we do see through the data that the efforts that are put forward do work. And so it's exciting to know that when we do put those efforts in, we do get to see improvements. The overall highlights of the new report are that we always at CDC, and there's going to be a big explanation in the methodology about how we even try to improve all the data that we have at CDC to better calculate estimates for this report compared to the 2013 report. The assessed threats do use the same three categories, which are, they are urgent, serious, and concerning. But this report in 2019, we have some new pathogens that made their way into the urgent category. So from 2013, none of the organisms left urgent. I believe none of them have been downgraded, but some additional ones have been added. So again, our work is not done. We've analyzed data to provide some changes over time, so we do have trend data for some of the pathogens when that capability was available for us to do. We have new information in the reports list. One thing that's new added to the report this time is a watch list. So there's 3 pathogens that are named. The watch list is basically, we see at CDC some small emergence. We might see it or be watching it globally. We might get indications of it domestically, but we don't have full surveillance set up for it, but we see that this might be of concern. So we're naming them now to indicate that we'll be watching them more carefully after, going forward now. And then we will see, hopefully they won't hit the top 18 list when we do the next report, but the indication is we may be seeing them on the list the next time we have a report. We also have spent a lot of time identifying from the data we know also the scientific gaps that still exist. We identify successful actions that have been taken and additional actions that are still needed. And the same from the 2013 report. This, again, I said, covers across all of CDC, healthcare-associated infections, tuberculosis, STDs, respiratory, enteric, and fungal infections. So a broad, comprehensive report from the CDC on antibiotic-resistant pathogens. Once the report comes out, next slide, please, you will also be able to follow the antimicrobial resistance website at CDC and all the specific websites of the divisions that cover the pathogens included. And you're going to see all those data being updated to make sure that they all match the data that are in the threats report. You'll also see that we start making changes to make sure that the One Health focus is very clearly identified and apparent on our website so that all know that we are working across the One Health spectrum when we look at AR at the CDC. We'll have new and updated infographics, a lot of which will be included and found in the threats report, and broader reached audiences, new groups that we really want to work more closely with, and that includes groups like veterinarians and food production industry, animal industry. Finally, following that, the week after next, is U.S. Antibiotic Awareness Week. So from November 18th to 24th, it's coming up, and you will see, you'll be able to follow on the website and through Twitter. You'll be able to see what we're talking about from CDC with regards to antimicrobial resistance and how we're trying to combat it. And again, because the threats report is coming out right before that, there'll be a lot of focus and talk around the threats report. So for that, I thank you. I thank you for your attention. I look forward to any questions after our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final presentation, USDA Agricultural Research Service, AMR and Alternatives to Antibiotics Research Across the One Health Spectrum, is by Dr. Roxanne Matroni. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everybody. My name is Roxanne Matroni. I'm the National Program Leader for Animal Health here at USDA ARS, and I co-lead a lot of our AMR activities with Dr. Kim Cook, who's the National Program Leader for Food Safety. So I'm excited to talk to you today about some of the research that ARS does as it relates to AMR and the One Health spectrum. So I just quickly wanted to point out that ARS is really a research organization. Oops, sorry. Don't know what happened to the slides there. Uh-oh.
I'll fix it. Just hang on one second.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just continue that USDA ARS is really a research organization. We fall under the Research, Education, and Economics Undersecretary, and so our goal is really to provide research. We're not a regulatory agency like APHIS or Food Safety Inspection Service, though we work with them quite regularly to inform some of their regulations through scientific evidence. And so that's really our mission area. We're also not a granting agency like the National Institutes for Food and Agriculture or NIFA, and that is more the extramural research arm of USDA. Okay, I'm going to try and advance the slides. Okay. So ARS, as I said before, is the intramural research arm of USDA, and our job really and our mission is to provide solutions to agricultural problems by conducting solution-oriented research. We have about 700 research projects across 16 national programs, and that spans everything within agriculture from natural resources to plants to food safety to animal health and production. We have about 2,000 scientists and postdocs, and we have about $1.3 billion fiscal year budget. We also have about 90 research locations across the country, including overseas laboratories that do biocontrol. So we are a fairly large and disparate organization. So I think both Dawn and Susan really covered it well to show that when you're talking about One Health, and particularly AMR, it's pretty complicated, and when you look at it, there are many different drivers from the human health side, from the animal side, and the environmental side. And so ARS really does a lot of research in many of the agriculture impacted environments to try to get an understanding of how does AMR move in all of these different environments, how is it transmitted, how does it persist, and then the development of mitigation strategies. So one of our program groups are Natural Resources and Sustainable Agricultural Systems, does quite a bit of research in terms of the soil microbiome, manure treatment, wastewater treatment, understanding of rivers and lakes, irrigation practices, our nutrition and food safety and quality. As you can imagine, they do quite a bit on the food safety side, so the pre-harvest food safety side, working in slaughterhouses with livestock, milk and eggs, looking at processes within slaughterhouse environments and those as mitigation strategies. And then the Animal Production and Protection Program does research in terms of aquaculture, understanding and trying to prevent disease within our aquaculture species as well as within our livestock species. So I can't really go into everything that ARS is doing related to AMR research today, so I'm just kind of going to give a broad overview. But one of our big areas that we're placing emphasis on is an alternatives to antibiotics, with the goal to provide solutions that allow for prevention and treatment of diseases in our livestock species, but don't result in creating selective pressure for the development of antimicrobial resistance, and then to allow practitioners and the livestock industry to therefore optimize their antibiotic use. We are focusing a lot of our alternatives to antibiotics for priority production diseases that often require antibiotic treatment, and so much of this is determined in conjunction with the OIE as they came out with 2 reports, one for poultry and swine species and then one for ruminant species. And so we use that list to help decide what diseases we are working on, as well as important food safety pathogens. And so our alternatives to antibiotics are really focused on novel antimicrobials that do not select for resistance, bacteriophage gene products, essential oils, immune enhancers, innate defense molecules, lytic enzymes, organic acids, phytochemicals, prebiotics and probiotics, interfering RNAs, therapeutic antibodies, and vaccines. So many of the technologies that I think that they're also talking about on the human health side. We are also doing quite a bit to look for genetics in the host species that might be associated with disease resistance so that antimicrobials don't have to be used when an animal has an infection. And I should also say that we're working in precision livestock technologies as well, so looking at ways in which we can identify sick animals earlier so that they can be pulled out of pens and treated appropriately prior to spreading the disease to other animals within the herd. So one of our examples of an antibiotic alternatives are egg yolk IgY. So necrotic enteritis in poultry is one of the main reasons why antibiotics are used in poultry, and so it's been a big push to develop other therapeutics that could be used to prevent this disease. So Dr. Hune Lillehoy in Beltsville, Maryland, has figured out a way to hyperimmunize chickens, which causes them to secrete a large amount of IgY antibodies into their eggs and their egg yolks. And you can actually harvest the eggs and dry the egg yolk and get the IgY back out, which you can then feed to chickens that are at risk of developing necrotic enteritis to prevent the disease. And so this is a really, I think, a really novel way of being able to treat poultry in an environmentally friendly way that is also a technology that will not result in increased resistance and will hopefully benefit the animal health and the animal welfare of poultry. Additionally, we have some projects that are looking at antimicrobial resistance in swine and animal pathogens as well as human pathogens. So one of the big ones being methicillin-resistant Staph aureus was in the news quite a few years ago. And so Dr. Tracy Nicholson at the National Animal Disease Center in Ames, Iowa, started looking at how similar different isolates were between swine and human health or human clinical settings. And she found that MRSA found in agricultural sources were very distinct from those obtained from human clinical settings. And she also wanted to look at, since zinc is often fed to swine as an antimicrobial, whether or not that could be selecting for resistance within large animal-associated MRSA. And she found that actually the prevalence of zinc resistance in large animal MRSA was lower than the prevalence of zinc resistance in human isolates. And so it's likely that zinc supplementation did not actually play a significant role in the emergence of large animal MRSA in the swine population. Also, we have within our food safety programs, we have a lot of people looking at different management practices and their impact on antibiotic resistance. And so Dr. Michael Rothrock is at the U.S. National Poultry Research Center in Athens, Georgia, and he's looking at pastured poultry that are raised in an antibiotic-free environment and trying to characterize the resistance in bacteria found on the farm and within the birds. And he found that really you still find multi-drug resistant bacteria and that just because something is antibiotic-free doesn't mean that they're antibiotic resistance-free. And he also found that E. coli are a poor indicator of antibiotic resistance. So moving to another part of the One Health spectrum, I think there's much more emphasis being placed on the environment and the role of the environment. And so one of the big questions that is out there is, what does the baseline resistance look like, and how do we characterize what baseline is in the environment? And so Dr. Terry Arthur at Clay Center, Nebraska, wanted to look at wanted to start trying to address that question with the idea of how do you then look at the impact of different things that you add to the soil, so like manure, fertilizer, et cetera, and how does that change what you see in terms of antibiotic resistance genes. And so what he found was that really when you add any nutrients to soil, you see an increase in the level of resistant bacteria. And so that you have to take that into account when you start looking or start trying to develop environmental baselines, because whether you're adding just straight broth or manure or anything, you're probably going to change the level of resistant bacteria, and that's really going to be important to know as you try to look at the movement of these genes through the environment. Since we're an intramural research agency, we basically get all of our funding from Congress and are directed with what we are able to study. But we've been able to set aside some intramural funding and have an intramural RFA for projects with the idea of trying to foster multidisciplinary and cross-programmatic projects that are high priority so that we can be more responsive to what's out there. And I think I've shown that ARS has a very broad spectrum of scientists working in this area, and so what we're really trying to do with this program is to bring our scientists together to try to get a better understanding of what's going on in the bigger picture. And so last year we received 44 proposals and we were able to fund 17 of them. But as you can see from the list, I think we were able to fund a lot of different projects and a lot of different topic areas. So one of the first ones that I think is very exciting is looking at our Human Nutrition Center is looking at the effect of different diets on the microbiota and on the resistome, and I think that will be a very interesting study, or the results we're excited to see. We're also keenly aware of animal welfare, and the removal of antibiotics may be having a detrimental impact on animal welfare, so trying to figure out what are other things that can be fed to pigs or to other species to try to mitigate some of those impacts, and that's happening at our research unit in West Lafayette, Indiana. We have projects working on development for vaccines in aquaculture and other alternatives to antibiotics, as well as within the crop side. We have projects working on priority pathogens, both on the food safety side as well as the animal health side. And as I said before, alternatives to antibiotics are a big topic for us, and so we're looking at developing or trying to develop preventives and therapeutics for some of these priority pathogens that require antibiotic use. And then to round out the One Health spectrum, we have projects looking at water, air, soil, and looking at trying to develop mitigation strategies to disrupt gene transmission in the environment. So finally, we are hoping to come out with an accomplishment report later this year so that you can see on the much broader spectrum all of the things that ARS is doing research in, and so I can keep you posted on that. We also are hosting the 3rd International Symposium on Alternatives to Antibiotics in Bangkok, Thailand, and that's in December of this year, and that is held in collaboration with the OIE. Dr. Cyril Gay is the one who's organizing that, and so his email is below if you're interested, and the website for the symposium is also listed on the slide. And with that, I'd say thank you, and the links on the bottom of the page were for more additional information on ARS's AMR programs. With that, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, thanks to all these great presentations, but you can email your questions to the presenters. You'll find their email addresses on the ZOHU Call webpage for today's call. Thanks again to all of today's speakers for their excellent presentations. Instructions for receiving free continuing education are available at cdc.gov/onehealth/zohu/continuing education. The course access code is OneHealth2019. To receive free CE for today's webcast, complete the evaluation at cdc.gov/TCE online by December 9th, 2019, and a web-on-demand recording of today's call will be posted online at cdc.gov/onehealth/zohu/2019/november.html by December 4th, 2019. Our next call will take place on Wednesday, December 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Please send suggestions and questions to zohucall@cdc.gov. For more information and to subscribe to our email newsletter, please visit cdc.gov/onehealth/zohu. Thank you for your participation. This ends today's call.